Hey guys, my name's Jeff. I'm with Y Logistics. This is our first podcast. Hopefully, you're going to enjoy these videos and get some educational content from it regarding logistics. Today, I'm with my business partner, Erik Holck, and we're going to talk about distribution network analysis. Is that actually a term you made up, or is that something that's solidified within literature?
Nope, this is something that is very real. It goes by a lot of different names. Some people call it a center of gravity study, supply chain optimization. But really, what it is all about is trying to find that best distribution model to be the most efficient from a cost standpoint, from a speed to market, and really help people position themselves in the right markets for getting their product to their end users and customers.
And with the customers that we're working with now, is there a specific industry that this works for? Is it across the board? Is it a certain vertical? I mean, what do you see there typically?
It's in all industry verticals. So whether it's food and beverage, whether it's consumer packaged goods, whether it's building materials, pharmaceuticals, anything, everybody goes through the same process because they have the same variables that come into play, right? So they've got a distribution center, they've got transportation, they've got either an import model, they may have co-packers, co-manufacturers. All those things play into the total strategy as it relates to setting up a distribution network and a distribution model.
And typically, and you've done this quite a bit over the years, when you see a customer, if they come to you and say, "Hey, look, we're looking to put a warehouse in X market," typically, what are you seeing as the biggest challenge within their business that they need to solve for?
There could be a lot. So, what could be driving them to go down this road could be a change in volume, right? Where all of a sudden they may have been very distribution heavy in the Northeast, and all of a sudden their customer base has shifted now to the West Coast. They could see a lot more volume out of the Southern California market. It could be a change in ports of entry for an importer. It could be a change in a co-packer partner where somebody that's manufacturing product for them, or it could be as simple as, hey, we need to get our transportation costs down. Is there a better way to do this?
And when you have a client that comes to you and they say, "Erik, can you guys help us with, finding our next warehouse location, or even just tell us what geographic location we can be in," where do you typically want to start?
It all starts with data. As you know, that's one of my favorite things to look at. So we want to get enough information, enough shipment history, enough activity on the warehouse side to be able to put costs to all this to help them figure out what makes the most sense. So having order data allows us to see where shipments actually end up, because what you don't want to do is, if you've got 80% of your volume, your customer volume on the East Coast, there's no point in having a warehouse in Southern California, right? You want to locate your inventory close to where your customers are to, again, make sure you're achieving a good speed to market so you can deliver on service expectations, but also minimize the transportation spend.
And once you identify a market and you hone in on a geographic region, let's say we look at the Northeast, Port of New York, New Jersey makes sense from where the product's getting manufactured overseas. You're bringing it in through the ports. What are the differences between warehousing in, let's say, New Jersey versus in Eastern Pennsylvania?
It's a balance of cost, service, and finding the right provider. More than anything, I think that's the point that a lot of people miss, is identifying who that provider is that's the right fit for your business. You want somebody that's got experience in the industry vertical that you play in. So if you are in the food and beverage industry, you don't want to go to a warehouse that deals predominantly with hazardous products, right? So it's not just about cost, it's not just about location, it's who's that right fit. So the New Jersey versus the Pennsylvania example, you you want to be able to map out what those costs are to say, hey, is it worth paying a little bit more from the drayage standpoint to move a container 40, 50 miles further west, and also in turn potentially pay a little bit less on the warehouse side? It depends on whether you have inventory that sits in a warehouse or if you turn it fast. If you're not worried about paying higher warehouse costs because you're turning product so quickly, then keep it close to the port. You're going to minimize that transportation spend.
If I was a CPG company a lot of my customers are located in the Northeast on the retailer and distributor side of things. Um, we've worked with you. We've identified that this is the location we need to be in. We have all the data. We get it out. As I go and talk to the warehouse providers, what are some good questions that I should be asking them?
Great question. That's what Jeff just talked about is one of the most important things that you can focus on in qualifying the warehouse provider. Make sure you have the right question. So first one always comes down to, if you're bold enough, you can ask them, right, what competitors of mine are you handling? Because you want to make sure they have experience handling similar type products. One that a lot of people forget about is, right, order lead time, right? What is the standard turnaround time for processing an order? How much lead time do you need for it? From the service standpoint, it's a matter of asking and identifying how a provider can accommodate seasonal fluctuations, right? If there's virtually no volume that's moving from, April through June, and all of a sudden July, August comes and volume essentially triples, quadruples, is the provider capable of handling that? Too many companies that we know and work with have reached a point where they make an agreement to go into a warehousing relationship with somebody, and then all of a sudden peak season hits and service goes out the window. And that's the last thing that you really want to be dealing with. So that's where I would start with it, with qualifying a warehouse.
And I'm going to get a little sidetrack here because you bring up a good point, but a lot of folks in the CPG world have similar peak seasons, right? Which it's known in the industry. We know when they are. It's going to spike here shortly, getting ready for the Christmas holiday. But why are peak seasons challenging for shippers and for the 3PL operators? And wouldn't you see that information in the data that you get?
You would hope that you would see that in the data that you get. Unfortunately, getting accurate data and being able to use that data to map out and communicate what sort of seasonality there is to a warehouse provider is harder than it looks, because you not only have seasonality as it relates to inventory, you've got seasonality as it relates to inbounds, you've got seasonality as it relates to outbounds. So it's not just a straight line that you're trying to solve for from an inventory standpoint. You've got really three variables that you have to look at, and what happens with the inbound flow adjusts what happens to the inventory, and then adjusts what happens to the outbound flow. So people that have a very well-refined model, they will see an inbound peak or inbound spike, then they'll see an inventory spike, probably follow that a month or two later, and then you'll see an outbound spike a month or two after that. So it's three lines moving in sync continuously 2 months apart. It's hard to explain that. It's much easier to illustrate it, but there should be a good flow to their business, especially if they're very well versed in what they're doing.
Getting back to the warehousing, when you're going through the analysis and you've identified the partners and you're kind of honing into two or three, right, what are standard line item level charges that you're going to be looking at as a CPG company or a shipper or importer when you're negotiating with the warehouses?
To start there, right, from the analysis standpoint, what I'll say is we can get to as whatever finite level of detail as we want. We can go down to a specific storage per pallet charge, a handling per piece charge, or at a high level, right, if we're looking to help somebody with a distribution network analysis, right, what we can do is start with essentially market type information. The average industrial real estate cost for rent is, $15 a square foot. The average labor rate in this market could be, $22 an hour. So we can do it at a high level with market information, but as you get into specific line item charges with an individual provider, you're typically looking at storage per square foot for larger type deals, or storage per pallet for, I'll say, smaller to mid-sized type warehouse opportunities. You're dealing with handling on a per pallet, per case level. There could be different charge types depending on how product is received, how orders are actually shipped. So there's a number of different ways and that warehouses charge. So not every warehouse provider charges the same way, which is frustrating to a lot of shippers and manufacturers and importers. So there's no real great spot to start with saying, hey, here's what you want to look at.
Earlier, you mentioned with finding a location, you mentioned drayage. And then you also mentioned in the same conversation where your customers are located.
Yeah.
Which one's more important? I mean, would you rather have your warehouse closer to production or the port of entry, or would you rather be closer to your customers? How do you decipher which one's going to, have more importance there?
Look, that's a great question. That's, I think, one of those problems that people have a hard time solving for is which one's more important. And a lot of it relates to supply chain strategy, right? So what do you want to do? What matters more to you, right? Are you building in more inventory so you have buffer to deal with port related delays and you don't want to see the delays on the final mile delivery to customers? Or are you more concerned with potentially, right, the inbound flow, and it doesn't matter how far you're shipping product because your warehouse is going to be able to turn orders around quickly. So it's more of a strategy type item there. Yes, cost factors into it, but it's how do you want to model your supply chain?
As we go down the path of modeling supply chain, at what point does it make sense to begin looking at a dedicated warehouse model, potentially using a 3PL operator versus going into a shared space in a public warehouse setting? Is there a level of inventory that's required? Is it a level of order count that's required? I mean, is there a level of spend that makes sense? Can you kind of dive into that a little bit?
A lot of it comes down to control, right? How much do you want to control? You could take a dedicated space and have somebody operate a 5,000 square foot warehouse for you if you really wanted to make sure that you didn't have product that was commingled, or if you just want to have complete control over it. What we've seen in our past has been that break point is probably around 25 to 30,000 square feet of inventory. So square footage is the easiest way to look at it as opposed to a pallet count, because every building type is different. You could have a 20-foot clear building, a 40-foot clear building. You're going to, based on looking at it that way, you could get double the amount of inventory in a 40-foot clear building as opposed to a 20-foot clear building. So from a square footage standpoint, I would say it's probably, as you would determine what your need is, as you get to that 25, 30,000 square foot number, it begins to make sense to look at more of a dedicated kind of contract type warehouse model as opposed to your traditional public warehouse model where you pay by pallet.
As I grow a CPG company and I'm sitting there and I've built a brand, I have customers, right? We're building that base. We've passed that $1 million in revenue mark, and we're continuously expanding, right? What data points really should I be collecting to then be able to use a service like Y Logistics to begin that network analysis?
I'll break it into two categories. Really, where you have to start is an import type model or domestic manufacturing type model. The variables are going to be different that you have to take into account there. In an import type model, you have to take into account ports of entry, ocean cost. From there, the other pieces are really the same: dray costs, warehouse costs, outbound transportation, final mile, warehouse transfer costs. On the domestic manufacturer, you get away from the port of entry challenge and also the ocean freight costs. It's really then more, what are my warehouse transfer costs from production? What are my warehouse related costs? What are my final mile transportation costs? And what matters equally across the board, regardless of whether you're an importer or domestic manufacturer, is where the orders are going, right? Where is my customer base? That is probably the biggest piece that comes into play. And again, to talk about it, we touched on it before, but the data points, that is very important for helping to model out where warehouses should be put.
When we talk about a customer for CPG and you get into the distributor world, you get into the retailer world, those are tough facilities to deliver into.
No doubt.
especially when it comes to their volumes. Peak season goes. I mean, everyone wants to eat, during the holiday season, and the volume spikes, and it's tough to get appointments, right? You have delays, waiting times, right? Is there anything that a CPG company can do on the warehouse selection side of things to alleviate some of those pains and pressures down the road?
Have conversations about who the customer base is that you're shipping to, right? So if it is, again, right, we spend a lot of time focused on food products. So if you have products that are going into a, you know, I'll call it food service distributor, you want to make sure that that warehouse has other volume either moving into those facilities or those food service distributors are picking up. If you can identify a warehouse provider that has a program built out that caters to the specific customer base that you sell to, you have a lot greater chance of being successful in delivering product on time or having product picked up on time by that retailer, by that distributor, whoever that could be.
Let's add a curveball and some complexity into this, right? I decide that I want to have multiple SKUs at different temp ranges, right? Is it possible to find a warehouse that can service both and have it under one umbrella? Do I need to look at multiple different providers in different markets? I mean, how do I go about figuring out how to maintain inventories at different temperature ranges across different product lines?
Comes down to the simplicity or the complexity that you want to have in your supply chain. If you want to have different providers that are handling products at different temperatures, you can do that by any means. If you're looking for simplicity, your best bet is to identify a provider that can handle product at multiple temperature ranges. So whether it's frozen, refrigerated, dry, there are providers out there that do that. It's a matter of figuring out whether those providers are going to be the best fit across all temperature ranges. If your business is segmented by temperature, so let's just say, right, dry product might be all retail, refrigerated product might be all food service. Typically, there's not going to be crossover there. So you could look at separating that by product type, separating that inventory by product type.
I would think that I could potentially do the analysis on my own, but why would somebody use a service like Y Logistics instead of sitting there crunching the numbers, going out to multiple providers to get rates back on the warehousing side? Why does it make sense to work through Y?
We try to simplify things for people, right? Too many times I've seen shippers, importers, manufacturers, whoever it is, they'll go to a larger consulting firm for a distribution network analysis to help figure out where do I need to position inventory? Where does my warehouse need to be located? And then what happens is these firms will present a 20-page report, do a presentation, and then as soon as that presentation is over, crickets, right? Their job is done. They've said, hey, I've helped you model this out, but that's where we come into play. We help people take that to the next level. We simplify the process for them where we will go beyond that and help them identify who's the right provider. Not only do we do that, but then we help the company that's looking for this to be done to have the conversation with the warehouse providers, right? That's our background. That's what we know. So if we can help them better understand why the warehouse might need this information, or right, what a warehouse is talking about as they're asking specific questions, we can help people get from A to Z quicker in this process.
Can a warehouse make or break your business?
No doubt. Yep. You can't ship product, you can't fulfill orders, you will not see a new wave of orders. That's the way this business works. There's enough competition out there where if you can't fulfill orders, there's another supplier waiting in line right behind you to, pick up your volume, to pick up the crumbs that you're leaving behind.
We've been talking about, I guess, providers that are doing long-term storage and managing inventory for clients. When would it make sense to get into a short-term scenario where I could potentially flip containers, bring them in, transload them, cross-dock them, get them out to my customers quicker? What scenarios have you seen that makes sense?
So there's a couple things as it relates to shorter term relationships. If you have a large seasonal spike and you can segment some of that volume away from your primary everyday provider, do it. Make their life easier by trying to push more volume through the same size facility with the same labor pool. You're going to slow down all the orders. So let's just say you use a warehouse not only for everyday shipments, but also as a transfer point to then ship, just say mixed inventory transfers to another warehouse in another part of the country. Get that out when it comes to seasonal peak, right? There's cross-dock providers out there that can easily handle the same thing, and you don't inundate your everyday provider and bog them down so they can't get the everyday orders out. That's number one. For speed to market, right? That's the primary one that I always go to is if you've got containers coming in through the New York, New Jersey ports and you need to get them out to, Chicago, Denver, right, the West Coast somewhere, and you're not putting those containers on a vessel directly that's going into the port of LA Long Beach or Stockton or Portland, you can increase the speed to market by running those containers into New York, New Jersey, having somebody cross dock that, manage the container pickup, manage the cross dock, and manage the outbound transportation. Typically, there's cost savings associated with that. There's been a lot of volatility in the ocean market, so I'm not really going to speak to that too much. But from a speed to market, you will definitely increase how quickly you can get product somewhere.
If people don't know that are listening to this or watching this, it's a lot of what we do is on the transportation side. The distribution network analysis, is something that we offer to all of our clients to help them in picking the right providers, and making sure. Why does it make sense if you're actually picking a transportation provider to use somebody that has such a warehouse background?
Too many times as you go through a study like this, you're going to get a one-sided approach, right? Where it's either going to be overly focused on the warehouse side, overly focused on the transportation side. Having somebody help you that's well-rounded really make sure that there's enough emphasis put on each individual part of the distribution network analysis.
Right.
Look, for us, it's all about value add, right? If we can help somebody by bringing insight on the warehouse side, the transportation side, the import side, why not?
So, Erik, now that we talked about a lot of things that we need to look for in distribution network analysis as a importer or a manufacturer, right, let's talk about kind of who we've helped in the past. And I know the example that comes to my mind is the beverage company, right? To paint the picture here, they identified a strategic co-packer in the New Jersey market, and they assumed that they needed a warehouse very close in the vicinity of that because the volume of transfers that were going to go into the warehouse out of that co-packing facility.
Yep.
So can you kind of go through that scenario and where we came in, what we looked at, and how we helped that client?
Yep. So this beverage manufacturer came to us and said, hey, we've identified this co-packer. We believe we want to have a warehouse in this market in New Jersey. And knowing what has been going on in the market with recent, development projects, with new warehouses being put up, with people like Amazon moving into the market that had very high labor requirements, we went back to him and said, hey, right, let's not focus so much on this particular market. Let's broaden the scope a little bit and not only look at New Jersey, but then also extend a search into Pennsylvania. And they were first a little hesitant about it because they had thought that, hey, right, we need to keep the inventory transfers from the co-packer to the warehouse to a minimum distance. And what we had put together for them was really an analysis that said, yes, that is important, but based on the size of the warehouse that you're looking at, you're going to pay X rate in this market, you're going to pay Y rate in this market. You can't just do it based on the inventory transfers. You have to look at the complete picture. So this was a very regionalized study that we did for them, but we looked at really how many turns a driver could get going from this co-packer to certain markets within New Jersey, certain markets within Eastern Pennsylvania. We took into account the industrial real estate cost by market, right? Most people think New Jersey is just one market. Unfortunately, it's not. There are sub-markets within New Jersey with varying rental rates for industrial real estate. And then the last piece we brought into it was the labor side. A lot of these studies will just stop with labor rates, not necessarily labor availability. We went down to that level and helped paint the picture for them that being in this warehouse market, you are not going to be able to staff the facility properly and retain that staff, which was huge for them, very important. They didn't want turnover of staff. So we ended up helping them identify a market that was much more in line with their expectations from the labor standpoint. It reduced their overall transportation cost because it looked at optimizing driver turns. How many turns can a driver get in a day? How many shuttles back and forth between the co-packer and the warehouse? And really, the last piece was the industrial real estate cost. They ended up saving a couple dollars a square foot on a building by going into a different market. And they've maintained the same model to this point. They haven't changed warehouse providers, haven't changed transportation providers, and have no plans of changing where they're holding this inventory.
So we took a problem that a customer had and identifying where they should be, and they thought that they knew exactly the location, and really they were just so hyper focused on production and storage.
Correct.
But there's so many other factors that need to be included in that analysis, and it's once again labor cost, markets, the industrial real estate market, like you mentioned.
And look, that's part of our goal as we try to help people. We want them to be focused on manufacturing, importing, selling, marketing, all that stuff, not the logistics piece, right? That's where having a good logistics partner really helps people take the next step in their business, because they don't need to be so focused on the transportation or the warehouse piece, because they've got the right partners that are going to give them that real honest feedback that they need.
What have I missed today? I mean, obviously, I think we went into a lot of things regarding points of entry, domestic manufacturing, import volumes, where the customers are located, speed to the market, the data points that we need to cover. What areas did I miss in this conversation that our clients and prospective clients should be looking at?
You covered a lot. The point that I'll just come back to, just to really put some more emphasis on it, is having a conversation to identify the right provider. You can go through a distribution network analysis and see the results of it, get it, and map out the points that have been highlighted. So you could be told, hey, you need a distribution center in Harrisburg, in Dallas, and in Stockton, California. And if you're overly focused on finding a warehouse in those markets, you may make a bad choice. Logic has to prevail, right? If just because the study said, hey, you need to be in this market, but there's no provider that you feel is the right fit, you don't have to follow that, right? Finding that right provider is the most important thing you can do, because a bad decision, a bad selection on a warehouse partner is going to stop your business growth, and it's going to cost you a lot of money to fix those changes. Moving warehouses is not cheap, right? The joke I always tell you is, right, the transportation industry is like dating. The warehouse industry is like getting married, right? You want to be in it for the long haul with your warehouse provider.
Absolutely.
The cost to change is too high. On the transportation side, unfortunately, cost to change is quite low.
Well, we appreciate the time. Hopefully everybody listening and watching this found some value in what we were talking about today. If you need any help with distribution network analysis, we'd be happy to help. Once again, my name's Jeff. This is Erik. We're with Y Logistics. Have a great day.